Hello, everyone. I'm Tyler Bench with Verasight, and I'm here with Ben Leff, CEO of Verasight. And we're going to dive into some really interesting and important new survey data we have about AI regulation. Ben, welcome. Why don't you tell us about why this new data is important and give us some of the high level things that we found with the data?
Great to be here, Tyler. We were very excited to run this survey because AI is quickly transforming our daily lives, but one of the areas where it's still super early is what regulation is going to look like. And with elections coming up this November, we really wanted to understand where Americans stands in terms of what they want their leaders to do with regulating AI companies. One of the most surprising findings from the survey is really both parties favor AI regulation. Both a majority of Democrats and a majority of Republicans, which really suggests that we're just scratching the surface of what regulation for this industry is going to look like going forward.
Awesome. That sounds super interesting, Ben. So, with that, tell us the answer. Are Americans optimistic or pessimistic about AI?
Yeah, well, it's Americans tend to be opinionated, and this is one where Americans, on the whole, are pretty uncertain. About 52% say the harms of AI outweigh the benefits, but 48% say the benefits outweigh the harms. So I think Americans recognize that there are benefits to AI in their daily lives, whether work or personal. However, there is uncertainty, particularly over the broader AI implication. One finding that was really interesting was about 7 in 10 Americans believe that AI is going to lead to job loss. And that's across both Republicans and Democrats, which shows it's really one of the few areas both parties agree on. And so, while there might be AI optimism in some domains, there's a growing fear that jobs will suffer.
So it sounds like Americans are a little bit split on whether they're optimistic or pessimistic about AI, but there's some shared specific concerns that people have. And you mentioned earlier on that even though there's a split on optimism and pessimism, a lot of Americans do actually support regulation of AI in general. So could you dive into that a little more? Would you say that most Americans support AI regulation and why?
Yeah, so most Americans do support AI regulation. In fact, what we did is we asked Americans about their support of regulating various industries. So everything from restaurants to social media to pharmaceuticals. And AI is the number two industry people want regulated. It's pharmaceuticals number one, followed closely by AI. So why that's particularly interesting is, over the past decade, we've seen so many congressional testimonies, hearings related to regulating social media companies, but Americans are far more likely to say AI needs regulation than social media. It's also one of only two industries, again, just AI and pharmaceuticals, where majority of Republicans think the industry needs to be regulated. So there's actually going to be bipartisan support potentially for additional regulations on AI companies.
Fascinating. And I bet this is something that, as Verasight, we're kind of in a position to see some of these trends early. And I think we'll continue to see the conversation evolve around this kind of at the political and national level. One thing I wanted to ask you a little bit about is why we're so confident in these results. I mean, I think anyone could, take their own informal poll on Twitter or X or ask their friends or already has their own opinions about AI and regulation. Tell me a little bit more about the approach that Verasight takes in terms of the methodology and why we're so confident in some of the findings that we have here.
Yes, so there are a few unique aspects of our approach. So the first is how we recruit respondents. So all respondents are recruited through our verified nationally representative panel. So it's really important when you're surveying an important issue like AI that you hear from a representative sample of Americans. So you want the people you're surveying to look like the population on everything from partisanship to age to income to education. As you can imagine, there are really large differences in views about AI, whether you have a PhD, whether you never went to college, if you're a Republican, if you're a Democrat. And so making sure the sample reflects that is really important. The second unique aspect of our study is matching our respondents to voter files. And what the voter file does is it's just a record if an individual respondent voted in an election. One surprising fact, which I didn't know when I started in this industry, is voter data is public. It doesn't say who you voted for, but it says if you're registered to vote and if you went out and voted in a primary or a general election. Why that's super important is what we found is Americans most likely to vote, so those who vote in primary elections, for instance, are the most likely to favor AI regulation. So this says something important because traditional surveys are often just of the general public, for instance. But what we're honing in on in this survey are the specific people who are going out in primary elections or likely to vote in general elections. And when you think of who politicians are most responsive to, it tends to be the people who go out to vote. And it's that group that is far more likely to support regulation.
Amazing. So that's really interesting that primary voters specifically are more likely to favor or to be in favor of AI regulation than the general population or other voters. What do you think that means for the upcoming election cycle?
I think it means that we're going to see politicians be more likely to take a stance supporting regulation. So among primary voters, 71% favor regulation. Among general election voters, that's closer to 60%. So these are differences that politicians are going to react to when deciding where they're going to take a stand on regulation.
So you think we're going to see lots of candidates come out in support of AI regulation in various forms?
We might, yeah. And particularly the finding that it applied to both parties means that we're going to see it on both sides of the aisle.
Everyone's going to be trying to outregulate each other. Fascinating. So, what other questions do you think are important here? We've got some really interesting and important findings back here. Are there any follow up questions that we have for voters about AI regulation? Are there more questions you would like to see the industry pursue in this area?
Yes, I think it's a really important issue to continue to track over time. I think Americans are realizing just how fast new AI tools are coming out. And so we expect people's opinions to also change just as rapidly, particularly if we see implications on job loss or if we see massive improvements to daily lives, we might begin to see some of these numbers shift. So this is going to be one area where we're going to be polling and tracking very closely over the next few months and years.
Awesome. And what other polling results or survey results can folks expect to see from Verasight in the coming months?
Yeah, so we're frequently polling every day on everything from pop culture issues to AI usage to politics. So if there's something divisive or interesting going on in the country, it's likely you'll see a polling result from us.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for being here. And we'll have you back on soon to talk about what new results we're seeing from Verasight polls.
Sounds great. Looking forward to it.
All right, thanks, Ben.